The Filipina sensation had turned Sobeys Stadium into a sea of red, blue and yellow for 5 straight days. Philippine flags draped from every railing. The chants of "Let's go, Alex" echoed through Toronto like thunder. But the moment Belinda Bencic delivered the final crushing blow, a 6-4, 6-0 demolition, something happened that sent shockwaves through the WTA headquarters. The 10,000 fans who had packed at every seat began to vanish. The roar turned to silence, and the tournament that had been riding the Eala wave was left scrambling to fill the void. The numbers were staggering. When Alex Eala arrived in Toronto for the Canadian Open, she didn't just bring her racket, she brought an entire nation. The moment her appearance was announced, seats sold out within 30 minutes. Tournament director Karl Hale couldn't hide his astonishment. "We've never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have this type of effect." The Filipino community, one of the largest in North America with over 270,000 people in the Greater Toronto area, had been calling the tournament office for months. When the schedule was finally announced, the phones rang, tickets sold, and boom. It was sold out on Wednesday night just like that. The 10,000-seat Sobeys Stadium had been transformed into Little Manila. Philippine flags hung from railings like a World Cup match. Fans wore custom Eala-mania shirts. One supporter even showed up wearing a dinosaur costume wrapped in the Philippine flag, a moment that would later go viral. The chants of "Let's go, Alex" were so deafening that the in-arena introduction was nearly drowned out. Even the food vendors had joined the movement, swapping chicken teriyaki for Filipino chicken adobo rice bowls, a first in tournament history. The Eala effect wasn't just about ticket sales. It was about who was buying those tickets. Families attended their first ever professional tennis match just to see her. Fans who had never followed tennis before were suddenly learning rankings, draws, and WTA schedules. But then, the dream came to an end. Belinda Bencic, the Olympic gold medalist and 2015 Canadian Open champion, delivered a clinical 6-0 victory in just 73 minutes. Eala, exhausted from 8 matches in 12 days across 2 countries, had nothing left, and the 10,000 fans who had packed the stadium began to file out. The roar turned to silence. The stadium that had been a sea of red, blue, and yellow was suddenly empty. For the WTA, the empty stands were a terrifying glimpse into what happens when the Eala wave recedes. The Filipino fans who had transformed the Canadian Open into a celebration of pride and identity weren't there for the other matches. They were there for her, and when she left, they left with her. The final point had been played. Belinda Bencic had just delivered a clinical 6-4, 6-0 victory in just 73 minutes. The 10,000 fans who had packed Sobeys Stadium, who had turned Toronto into Little Manila, who had waved Philippine flags from every section, began to file out. The roar that had shaken the stadium moments before faded to a whisper. The sea of red, blue, and yellow that had transformed the Canadian Open into a celebration of Filipino pride was suddenly gone. And for the WTA, the empty stands were a terrifying glimpse into what happens when the Eala wave recedes. Tournament director Karl Hale had already witnessed the unprecedented impact of what he called Eala-mania. The Filipina sensation had sold out a 10,000-seat stadium in just 30 minutes, a feat only Serena Williams had achieved in the last 20 years. The demand was so overwhelming that organizers were forced to move her match from the 2,800-seat grandstand to center court. "We can't put her on there because she probably sold upwards of 5,000 tickets," Hale had told the Tennis Channel. Even the food vendors had joined the movement, swapping chicken teriyaki for Filipino chicken adobo rice bowls, a first in tournament history. But the empty stands after Eala's loss told a different story. The fans who had arrived hours early, who had worn custom Eala-mania shirts, who had carried signs that screamed "Mahal Kita," had come for one reason and one reason only, to support Alex Eala. When she left, they left with her. For the tournament organizers, the sudden emptiness was a brutal reminder of the power of the Eala effect. The Filipino community in Toronto, one of the largest in North America, with over 270,000 people, had transformed the Canadian Open into a cultural celebration. But they weren't there for the tournament. They were there for her. Eala herself, despite the loss, remained gracious and optimistic. "It's always tough, of course, after a loss, but like I said, I'm looking back at these past maybe 2 weeks as a really big positive," she said in her post-match press conference. "I think I've played really well. I've gotten through so many obstacles. Of course right now, there's that initial kind of, just a little tired and down from the match." She also confirmed that she needed a break, even if it was just 2 days. "I definitely will take maybe 2 days off. I do have to travel to Cincinnati. I need to get a haircut. I haven't gotten a haircut in a while. My nails are grown out," Eala said, lightening the mood with a laugh. The joke was a reminder that beneath the pressure, beneath the expectations, beneath the weight of a nation's hopes, Alex Eala was still just a 21-year-old who needed a moment to breathe. The empty stands at Sobeys Stadium weren't a sign of disappointment. They were a testament to something far more powerful. The fans who had filled the stadium for 5 straight days hadn't just come to watch a tennis match. They had come to witness history. They had come to celebrate a movement. And when that movement came to an end, they didn't stay to mourn. They left with a sense of gratitude that would echo far beyond the Canadian Open. For the WTA, the lesson was clear. The Eala effect was real, it was powerful, and it was here to stay. But it also came with a warning. The fans who packed stadiums to see Alex Eala were not just tennis fans. They were Filipino fans. They were a diaspora that had found a hero in a 21-year-old from Quezon City. And if the tour wanted to keep them, it would have to keep them coming back for more. As Karl Hale had put it just days earlier, Alex is an absolute blessing to the sport of tennis and our tournament. And now with the stands empty, the WTA was left wondering, what happens when that blessing isn't on the court? The empty stands at Sobeys Stadium after Alex Eala's loss were more than just a visual. They were a financial and strategic alarm bell for the WTA. For 5 straight days, the 10,000-seat stadium had been a sea of red, blue, and yellow. Philippine flags draped from every railing. The chants of "Let's go Alex" echoed through Toronto like thunder. But the moment the Filipina sensation walked off center court after her 6-4, 6-0 loss to Belinda Bencic, the roar turned to silence and the stadium emptied. Tournament director Karl Hale had been upfront about the unprecedented nature of the Eala phenomenon. "We've never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have this type of effect," Hale admitted just days earlier. The 21-year-old had sold out a 10,000-seat stadium in just 30 minutes. A feat that, according to multiple reports, only Serena Williams had achieved in the last 20 years. Not Rafael Nadal, not Roger Federer, not Novak Djokovic, just Serena and Alex Eala. But the empty stands after Eala's defeat revealed something troubling for tournament organizers. The fans who had packed the stadium weren't there for the tournament. They were there for her. Families had attended their first ever professional tennis match just to see her. Fans who had never followed tennis before were suddenly learning rankings, draws, and WTA schedules. The food vendors had even added Filipino dishes to the menu, chicken adobo and pork lumpia, in an unprecedented move that tournament director Hale called the first time I've ever heard of a tournament. Halfway through the tournament, add a food offering just because of a player. The Eala effect was real, and it was powerful, but it also came with a warning. The Filipino diaspora that had transformed the Canadian Open into a cultural celebration wasn't coming back for the other matches. When Eala left, they left with her. For the WTA, the message was clear. The tour had found a golden goose, a player who could bring an entire nation of 110 million people to the sport. But that golden goose couldn't be taken for granted. The fans who packed stadiums to see Alex Eala were not just tennis fans. They were Filipino fans. They were a diaspora that had found a hero in a 21-year-old from Quezon City. And if the tour wanted to keep them, it would have to keep them coming back for more. As tournament director Hale had put it, Alex is an absolute blessing to the sport of tennis and our tournament. And now, with the stands empty, the WTA was left scrambling to figure out what happens when that blessing isn't on the court. The empty stands at Sobeys Stadium after Alex Eala's loss weren't just a financial warning for the WTA. They were a cultural reckoning. For years, the tour had struggled to expand its audience beyond traditional tennis markets. It had invested in marketing campaigns, social media strategies, and player development programs. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for what Alex Eala had accomplished. And nothing had prepared them for the silence that followed her departure. What happens when the Eala effect isn't on the court? Was the question that haunted tournament organizers and WTA executives alike. The answer was written in the empty stands of Sobeys Stadium. The answer was the silence that had replaced the deafening chants of "Let's go, Alex." The answer was the sudden emptiness that had transformed a stadium filled with Philippine flags into just another tennis venue. Coco Gauff, who had experienced the Eala effect firsthand in Dubai and knew exactly what was at stake, had already spoken about the importance of embracing the phenomenon. "I think the demographic that Alex is bringing to the sport of tennis is so great," Gauff had told reporters in Toronto. "I think all of us should really embrace that. Because we're all benefiting from it." She had also acknowledged the personal connection she felt to Eala. "I know Alex personally, and what you guys see on the court is what we see off the court. I'm always going to be supporting her, and it was great to see her win in DC." Gauff's words carried weight. As a two-time Grand Slam champion and one of the most marketable players on the tour, she understood that Eala's rise wasn't just good for the Filipina. It was good for everyone. To just see a nation of people who maybe don't always feel represented in this sport really see themselves out there, I think it's incredibly inspiring and makes it fun for me to go out there and just play, she had said. But the WTA couldn't rely on Gauff's optimism alone. It needed a strategy. It needed to figure out how to keep the Filipino fans coming back even when Eala wasn't playing. It needed to turn a phenomenon that was currently centered on one player into something broader and more sustainable. Tournament director Karl Hale, who had already witnessed the unprecedented impact of the Eala effect, had called her an absolute blessing to the sport of tennis. He had been stunned by the ticket sales, the food offerings, and the thousands of fans who had turned Toronto into Little Manila. But he also understood the challenge. The Filipino community for months now has been calling in, asking when does she play? Who does she play? Where does she play? Hale had recalled. My mother knows her uncle, sister's brother, cousin. They were so excited to have her. The excitement was undeniable, but it was also fragile. As Eala continued her North American swing, the WTA would have to find a way to channel that enthusiasm into something that could outlast a single player's run. The empty stands at Sobeys Stadium after Alex Eala's loss were a stark reminder of a simple truth. The Eala effect was real, it was powerful, and it was entirely dependent on one person. The WTA had found a golden goose, a player who could bring an entire nation of 110 million people to the sport. But that golden goose couldn't be taken for granted. Tournament director Karl Hale had been upfront about the unprecedented nature of the Eala phenomenon. We've never seen a player ranked outside the top 5 have this type of effect, Hale admitted. The 21-year-old had sold out a 10,000-seat stadium in just 30 minutes, a feat that, according to multiple reports, only Serena Williams had achieved in the last 20 years. But the empty stands after Eala's defeat revealed the flip side of that success. The fans who had packed the stadium weren't there for the tournament, they were there for her. Coco Gauff, who had experienced the Eala effect firsthand, had already spoken about the importance of embracing the phenomenon. I think the demographic that Alex is bringing to the sport of tennis is so great, Gauff had told reporters. I think all of us should really embrace that because we're all benefiting from it. She had also acknowledged the personal connection she felt to Eala. I know Alex personally, and what you guys see on the court is what we see off the court. The Eala effect represented a demographic shift that the sport had never seen before. Tennis had always struggled to expand its audience beyond traditional markets, but Eala had accomplished in months what marketing campaigns had failed to do in decades. The question was whether the tour could capitalize on that momentum. For now, the answer remained unclear. The Filipino fans who had transformed Toronto into Little Manila were loyal to Eala, not to the tournament. And until the sport could find a way to convert that loyalty into something broader, the empty stands after Eala's loss would remain a symbol of both the opportunity and the challenge that the Eala effect represented. I am kind of just like a drop in the ocean when it comes to Filipinos and their pride for their culture and where they come from, Eala had said after her loss, reflecting on the movement she had become part of. I do a lot to kind of represent my country and I'm very proud of it. But you see, the stadium was full of people who do the same thing, right? So I guess that just shows you what kind of a community we are and what kind of people we are and how supportive we are of each other. Those words captured the essence of what had happened in Toronto. A 21-year-old from the Philippines had become the center of a movement that transcended tennis itself. And the empty stands after her exit were proof that the movement was about her. Not about the tournament, not about the tour, but about a connection between one player and a community that had waited generations for someone like her. The WTA had been given a gift. Now it had to figure out how to keep it.